Hi, welcome to Mandated Reporter Training. Each year, we're required to do a refresh of your mandated reporting training. It is important that we do this so that we provide the reporters with the information and tools necessary to identify child abuse and neglect, as well as how to and where to report that abuse or suspected abuse. So, what's the law say about mandated reporting? In California, as a mandated reporter, you are legally required to report any suspected cases of child abuse or neglect that you become aware of in your professional capacity within your scope of employment here at Building Connections. Here's a question I get a lot. Who is responsible to make that report of suspected abuse? Can't you just call me and have me make that report for you? You don't necessarily have to make it, right? No, that's wrong. Absolutely, the penal code says that mandated reporters are anybody who learns of abuse or suspected abuse within their capacity of employment. That means that if you learn of that abuse, you are the one that needs to report it because you are the one that's going to have the most details to lead to keeping that child safe. On that note, you can always call and talk to me or one of your supervisors on the report. However, what I'm going to tell you each time, I'm going to listen to you. I'll give you advice on how to make that report right. But I'm going to tell you that I can't tell you whether or not the incident is reportable because I cannot judge whether something is abuse or not. Unfortunately or fortunately, there are penalties for failure to report. There's also penalties for false reporting, and they do depend on the context and the jurisdiction. Mandated reporters who fail to report any instances of known or reasonably suspected, that's important, reasonably suspected child abuse or neglect can be guilty of a misdemeanor that is punishable up to 6 months in jail in a county jail and or a $1,000 fine. Any mandated reporter who willfully fails to report abuse or neglect of any person who then is hurt either in death or great bodily harm shall or can be punished for up to a year in county jail and or a fine of $5,000. Now, here's something that's sad, and it does happen. Any false reporting, that means intentionally reporting something that you know is just not true, there's also penalties for that. However, if you report something that's reasonably suspected and it turns out not to be abuse, or in the opinion of the social worker, not abuse, you will not be fined. Let's spend some time talking about or recognizing potential abuse of child abuse or neglect. In the case of some abuse, timing is critical to help that child. So make sure that you, as soon as you suspect something, you're reporting it as soon as possible. Physical signs can include unexplained bruises. Now, I understand that children bruise a lot, but sometimes bruises look different than others. You can see fingerprints or burns in the form of cigarettes or burns that just shouldn't be on the child. Other injuries that are out of place for their age or developmental stage, frequent injuries, and explanations that just don't match the harm that you're observing. Behavior changes in a child can be signs of potential abuse or neglect. Sudden shifts in behavior, such as becoming withdrawn, anxious, or excessively aggressive, can be signs of abuse. Children who display fearfulness, especially around certain individuals, or are scared to go home, can be signs of neglect or abuse. Emotional distress, signs of depression, anxiety, severe mood swings. This child might also be feeling a low self-worth and talk about self-harm. Neglect indicators, those are easier to see. Constantly dirty, wearing inappropriate clothing for the weather, appearing malnourished, or having untreated medical conditions. Also, having cavities or not seeing a dentist or looking like they don't brush their teeth are sign of neglect. Neglect may show in poor school attendance or lack of supervision. Developmental delays. Now remember, most of the kids that we work with have developmental delays, and they are not a sign of abuse or neglect. But some developmental delays that cannot be explained in any way, such as physical, emotional, or intellectual development, may be a sign of neglect or abuse. A child that all of a sudden socially withdraws, avoids their friends, families, or social situation. The child may seem isolated or disinterested in activities they previously enjoyed. Now, if you observe these signs, it is important to approach the situation with sensitivity and care. Reporting concerns to the appropriate authorities can ensure that a child receives the necessity, protection, and support. Remember, it's better to show concern and be wrong than overlook a potentially harmful situation. Now, there might be a time for you to discuss suspected abuse with a child. Maybe they bring it up in a session. Here are some strategies for discussing suspected abuse with a child. First, you're going to stay calm, remain composed, and don't overreact. Listen. Give the child your full attention and listen carefully. Reassure the child. Let them know that they are not in trouble and that you're only there to help. Ask questions, but when you ask questions, make sure that they're open-ended questions. To clarify, avoid leading questions such as why questions. Reflect. Use the child's language to reflect back what they have said to you so that you show that you understand. Don't blame the child. It's not their responsibility for the abuse. Let them talk. Allow the child to talk about things at their own pace. Don't pressure them for details. Report the abuse to the local police department or welfare department. All right, let's talk about how to make a report. You're going to first report immediately by phone or as soon as possible. Make that phone call to CPS and or the sheriff's department. Each CPS office is going to be dependent on county. They all have their own numbers. You're going to report to the county in which the incident occurred. Then next, you're going to follow up within 36 hours in a written report. That must be sent in, whether it's faxed or submitted electronically. You're going to want to hold on to this as well to prove that you made it. Even send that into HR so that HR has a copy of it. The written report should be completed on the state form called the 8572. This can be downloaded on the government site, and your CPS worker will lead you to the right form and where to find it at the time. Now that your CPS report has been made, what are those next steps? Honestly, you're going to make sure that that report that you had written gets sent in so that it can be filed in your file or the child's file. You're also going to sit back and wait. Sometimes you won't hear anything, and other times you may have a follow-up from the CPS worker or a police officer asking you more questions as they investigate. Remember, at that point, it's not your job to go ahead and investigate that on your own. You're just going to wait. Let's talk about special issues in school and avoid reporting that abuse. Did you know that nearly 10% of students in California have reported over the past 10 years that they've been sexually abused in a California school? That's kind of astonishing. Parents send their children to school, and they should have the expectation that their child's going to be safe at school. And that means that we must understand how to prevent abuse at school, not just report it after the fact. Sexual abuse claims are not isolated to adult to student behaviors. Claims are also student to student sexual encounters. In these cases, we need to make sure that we are supervising these students and reporting abuse as suspected or we find. Some of the abuse from adults can be grooming behaviors. Grooming is a term that's used to refer to the process that child molesters use to create an environment where they can sexually abuse a child without being caught, without the child telling. Child molesters use this process to earn their trust, gain access to the children, desensitize them to touch, developing intimate emotional bonds, isolating them from other trusted adults, creating complicity and compliance, also maintaining a secure person to that child. Child molesters will typically groom children and their families for months, sometimes even years, before violating sexual boundaries. The process is identifiable, making the abuse predictable and preventable. Now, just because you see some of these behaviors in adults doesn't necessarily make them a child molester. But as adults, we really do have to watch how we interact with children and not normalize this behavior. We don't want to be overly helpful, make the child feel uncomfortable with the boundaries, engage in excessive physical contact with children, spend more time with the children than adults their own age, spend excessive time interacting with children by email, text messaging, social media. You guys should know as employees that you should not ever be emailing one of our clients or children. You should definitely not be giving them your phone number, text messaging with them, and social media is 100% no, including roadblocks. It is usually aware of children's trends, terminology, computer games, and music. Signs of other physical abuse can include physical abuse, verbal abuse, neglect, domestic violence, and substance abuse. That adult might be interested in talking about the the bodies that are developmentally happening over the preteens and teens. Spend time uninterrupted with the kids. Is great to the kids, maybe too good, maybe buy some candy. Showers that child with gifts, treats, and outings. Lets the child break rules and get away with inappropriate behavior, sneaking them things like iPads, their telephone during the school day and allowing them to do that, asking a child to keep a secret. Don't ever ask the kids to keep a secret. Asking to bathe or wash a child who's old enough to do it themselves. Going to the bathroom with a child that's independent in the bathroom. Walk in on a child as they're dressing. Create an intimate emotional relationship with kids, giving them favors, insisting on being behind closed doors with the child in private. These are all just some examples of behaviors that you should be looking into as a coworker or other people that interact with children on a daily basis. So what safeguards are in place for mandated reporters? It is an uncomfortable situation to be reporting people that you see every day that you have to interact with. As a mandated reporter, you are protected from other people knowing that you're the one that made the report. Everything is strictly confidential, and only your name is provided to investigators or parties that are working on the case. Under state law, mandated reporters cannot be held liable for civil or in criminal court as reporting what's required. However, the federal law mandates that reporters only have immunity for reporting things in good faith. So you are protected if you make a report that you in good faith believe happened. Also, understand that our children don't come in contact with very many adults. So when CPS does happen to show up at their house, they may know that you were the one who reported, or at least assume. Let's take a minute to talk about elder or dependent care abuse. Who is required to report this abuse? Any person who has assumed full-time or intermittent responsibility, care, or custody for an elder dependent adult, whether or not he or she receives compensation, should report any signs of abuse. This includes doctors, surgeons, psychiatrists, dentists, residents, interns, chiropractors, nurses, dental hygienists, clinical social workers, associate close social workers, LMFT. Any person that's licensed is responsible for reporting suspected abuse for adult dependents. Now, elderly or dependent abuse can be all of the suspected abuse that we talked about for child abuse, but also can include financial abuse. Thank you for attending our training on mandated reporters. We'll see you next year.